Lincoln City Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee meeting of May 5, 2014. May we have a roll call, please?
Rick Anderson.
Here.
Gordon Eggleton. Gary Ellingson.
Here.
Dennis Hoagland.
Here.
Michael Holt. Esther Norikis.
Here.
Henry Quant.
Here.
Wes Ryan.
Here.
Roger Sprague.
Here.
James Taylor.
Here.
Susan Walke. And Jeff Weissman.
Thank you. Please rise and we will recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We need to have an election for a chair and a vice chair. I will open the nominations for chair at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I'll nominate Susan Walke for chair.
Okay.
Seconded.
Are there any other nominations, or do you want to? No. Yeah. Let's see if there are any other nominations. No more nominations. Okay.
Move to close.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of closing nominations, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. Okay. I guess we need to officially vote on Susan Walke. So
I would move that we elect Susan Walke as chairman of the Budget Committee.
okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? No discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. We need a vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
Mr. Chair, I'll nominate Henry Quant as vice chair.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
Second.
I think rather than go through that same folderol we just went through, I will ask for a motion to elect Mr. Quant.
By acclamation.
By acclamation, if you want to do that.
Done.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Henry, you're the vice chair.
Thank you.
I will pass the gavel down to our new chair.
Okay, I need to make an announcement. In order for your voices to be heard, you really have to be really close to the microphone. Otherwise, the people on TV can't hear anything.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to Kurt Olson, our director.
Good evening.
The City of Lincoln City initiated urban renewal program back in 1988. The urban renewal plan was called the Year 2000 Development Plan. I remember when I first started working here, that seemed like such a long ways away, and now it's like 14 years ago. It's unbelievable. The plan outlined 18 different project categories in 4 general areas, and it set up an amount that was anticipated to spend in each of those categories. For example, public works infrastructure, it was designed to allocate about 58% of the tax increment funding that the Urban Renewal Agency would get over its lifetime towards public works infrastructure, 58%. Visitor facilities and parks, 20%. Development of property, 15%, and then 7% of the funding over the course of the life of urban renewal was to go towards property rehabilitation, for example, our loan program and economic development type of stuff. In 2009, though, we did do a substantial amendment that did actually add economic development as a tool in our toolbox. When I joined the city in 1991, the agency still wasn't receiving enough money to actually do any major projects. The agency borrowed some money from the city in order to buy some property so it could build some parking lots primarily in the Ocean Lake area. And then when I was actually working in Public Works, we would always look at a project. We didn't know much about urban renewal at the time. We'd look at a project, a water line went from here to here. If it went through the urban renewal district, we'd figure out how much and we'd start charge it to somebody called urban renewal. We had no idea who that was. Ron Tierney knew, but we didn't really know. But in 1998, the agency started receiving sufficient funds to begin some comprehensive redevelopment programs. And so I was hired as the full-time director of the agency, and we started what we've kindly referred to. Well, it started out as the boa constrictor that swallowed 6 chickens. You know that with Lincoln City gets fat at each of our historic districts. But Johan one night said, Lincoln City is like a string of pearls, and so we call it the String of Pearls plan now. This was to address the specific needs of each of the different districts, knowing that they would all be different. Some had sidewalks, some didn't have sidewalks. Some had traffic signals, some will never have traffic signals. So we started what's known as a charrette process, and it's a comprehensive way to go in, spend a lot of time and effort in a short period of time with the public to try to create the projects that those different areas are going to need. And through this project, we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of citizens who've put in many, many, many hours into that process to create these plans that we work on, have worked on over the last few years. Much work has been completed in Taft and Ocean Lake, as you know. Those are our major business districts that we started in first. Then we went to Nelscott and the Cutler district. Those were more residential, so the projects were completely different. The needs were completely different. And there weren't as many projects to be done in the urban renewal, in the residential districts. It appeared that the agency was going to run out of time, though, to get to the north end of town. We refer to that area as the Wacoma area. However, it's always been the healthy business district, so it wasn't like it needed urban renewal incentives and urban renewal projects up there in order to jumpstart business. That's where businesses wanted to be. That's where the franchises wanted to be. Because of that, a lot of the infrastructure was done by that development. For example, sidewalks and stuff. Most all the sidewalks in the Wacoma area in the north have all been done by development up there. However, that development has also used up the capacity of our sanitary sewer system, which many of you are aware of. As you may know, I served on the executive board of the State Association of Urban Renewal Agencies for 10 years, and 2 years as the president. And during this time, there were a number of legislative changes that were taking place. And there was always lots of stuff being proposed to try to get some of that funding from urban renewal, because it was a successful program. It had a lot of funding. And as other programs lost their funding, everybody was looking at urban renewal. How do we get a little bit of that money? So there were always every legislative session, there was all these new legislative proposals that we had to go down in order to speak in favor of urban renewal. There was lots of examples that we were able to give, and we were able to stave off a lot of those types of the legislative changes, but there were a few that came through that made some drastic changes. And so at one point we decided we're just going to have a summit with some of the taxing districts and legislators and see if we could come up with a comprehensive program of some changes that would sort of be a compromise, and so that we could sort of create urban renewal as it's going to be for a period of time, so that it wasn't going to constantly change, because there's always those unforeseen consequences that happen when that takes place. So we did that. We had a number of meetings over a number of years, worked with special districts, which are the various taxing districts, and came up with a plan. This was statewide. This wasn't just Lincoln City. We were in pretty good shape with our taxing districts. They were all fairly supportive. But on the statewide level, we came up with some comprehensive changes, and we created what's called the truce. And it was a multi-year truce, and it said that if we can get these changes done at the legislative level, the special districts won't bring any more changes forward, and if legislature does, we will band together to oppose them. And so that's been going on for a number of years now, and it's been a delight to not have to fight the issues of urban renewal at the legislative level. The reason I mention all of this is because one of the compromises in that document is something called the underlevy plan. underlevy option. Prior to this, if an urban renewal agency didn't want to collect 100% of their tax increment that was available to them, that's just too bad. They had to accept it. And there were some issues with that, not major ones, but there is an issue with always having to have debt. And an urban renewal agency is supposed to always be in debt. So you're not supposed to get money and buy a bench. You're supposed to go out and buy the bench, put it on time, and then use the money to pay off the loan, so to speak. So there was that issue. And then there were other issues where agencies just weren't ready to go out and do major projects yet, or maybe they were ready to cut back. They didn't want to sunset their district, but they didn't want, for whatever reason, politically usually, was that they would not want to do any more projects for a little while. They're just going to hang low. Well, they couldn't just say, well, we're just going to give that money back to the taxing districts. So one of the options that we put forth was the underlevy option to allow that to happen. And so here we are, Lincoln City, version 3.0. It's a 10-year program with $7 million available and using that underlevy program. And for those that aren't quite familiar with it, it's where the Urban Renewal Agency this year is only going to collect 20% of the funding that's available to it. 80% is going to go back to all the taxing districts. And one of those taxing districts is the city of Lincoln City. By doing this, for 10 years, we believe that we can continue to do some of those projects that are left in the community visions and also do these major projects in the north end of town that you've heard of, the infrastructure projects specifically around the sewer upgrades. And by doing this, this should promote development of the large tracts of publicly owned land, privately owned land, and tribal lands in the north end of the city where most of our vacant property is now. And I think with that, I will stop and continue when we go into the discussion of the budget. But I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any agency members have questions of Ms. Russell?
The funds that's going back into what, the Lincoln City General Fund, or where you're only pulling 20% of the funds that you could do, is that because the general fund has a hole that needs to be filled, or is that because your coffers are at $7 million, you feel you have enough to accomplish the projects that you've got envisioned in your roadmap?
Yeah, that's pretty close. The last part of it is correct. We are allowed to continue to do projects as an urban renewal agency until we spend $7 million more dollars.
Okay.
And so that's where the $7 million came from. And then based on what we have and what we need to collect, if we collect about $500,000 a year, that'll add up to $7 million at the end of that 10-year program.
The part about the general fund, we had anticipated up until 6 months ago or so that 100% of the money would come back into the general fund. And we based our financial planning around that. We and if you we'll get into this at the next meeting more. I'm going to deal specifically with that. We are fine with it 20%. And yes, there would have been a hole.
You have to be louder.
Any other questions?
So, Kurt, just would you mind going a little bit more into the why urban renewal, maybe some of the options that, for the North End development? It crosses over into city, I understand, but the agency chose to pursue these kind of developments in the North End, and you spoke to it a little bit about because of development, but could you go into a little more, again, for the whole committee, of the process that we went through, talking to the districts, other taxing districts, and just...
Yeah, so the Urban Renewal Agency was set to sunset at the end of 25 years, which was going to be June of this year, next month. And that was the way urban renewal was set up originally back in the 1980s, 1990s, all the way up until, I think, Measure 50. I don't know the year that took place, but it was at that point when the tax rolls were rolled back 3 years and then set at only increasing 3%. One of those unforeseen circumstances was that urban renewal agencies had pledged 100% of their tax increment to pay off their bonds. And when they rolled that back 3 years and then cut it down to 3%, the projections weren't going to pay off those bonds. So then they came back and made a change and said, well, then you're not going to have to be a 25-year program anymore. You can just go until you spend what you said you were going to spend in your original plan. So we never chose, at that time, we didn't choose to change our date, and it was always going to be the 25 years. And then when we started looking at the development potential of the north end of town and the difficulties that developers were having up there with the infrastructure, the cost of infrastructure up there, it became obvious there was really only one option, and that was for urban renewal to be able to do that. And so the urban renewal could fund those projects. It just needed some time and money to do it. So we were able to go ahead and extend urban renewal out 7 years as a minor amendment, and we went to all of the taxing districts that we didn't need their approval to do it, but we did need to consult with them and let them know what was going on. And they had an option to come and to support it or oppose it or to remain silent on it. And so we went to each of the taxing districts, had a meeting with each of them, discussed the option of an under-levy by allowing them they wouldn't get 100% in June of the taxes they were expecting, but they would get 80%, showed them what those numbers were, and all of them were able to work with that and allowed us then to continue the district for 10 more years.
A little bit more on what development would have faced in the absence of this. The West Devils Lake Road lift station is at capacity within a few units. So that any further development, whether that be Lincoln Palisades 3, which we have an application for, the Villages or other property, would have had to upgrade that station. That's about $1 million chunk. You can't upgrade that in little pieces. It's a whole new wet well, a whole new pumping system to upgrade that. And so while our development that occurs in Lincoln City isn't massive numbers of housing units at once, so no developer is going to be able to front $1 million on top of all their other development costs, $20,000 in system development charges per lot, infrastructure, on-site infrastructure, et cetera. It just wasn't going to happen. So urban renewal takes care of that. The city can still decide whether it wants to seek recovery on a per unit basis or on a per phase basis. I will be recommending that we don't seek recovery on that be an investment in building jobs and building assessed valuation and getting development going again. That'll be my recommendation, but the city still and the council still has the choice of saying we want to recover all or part of that cost that urban renewal is putting for it. I don't really expect that to happen, but it will be a decision that has to be made.
The next item on the agenda is a review of the rules of procedure. I'm not sure who's... here.
Copy of the agenda? She mentioned an agenda.
The Budget Committee must receive the budget message from the Budget Officer to the City Manager, review the proposed budget, hear public questions and comments, approve the budget for council adoption, and approve the property tax amount or rate of property taxation. As provided in state law, the Budget Committee may receive the budget document before the first meeting reviewing the proposed budget. The document must also be made available to the public at the same time. Once the budget document has been made public, only the Budget Committee may enter the governing body and make changes. The Budget Committee may request any information it requires from a review of the budget document from the staff. Generally, these requests are directed to the city manager or a department head. The Budget Committee does not approve new personnel, employment, contract, or salary schedules. However, these items are part of the proposed budget and have to be discussed. While the Budget Committee cannot negotiate contracts, it can adjust the dollar amount in the proposed budget that is available to the elected governors. These adjustments would affect staffing or service levels. The Budget Committee can also review capital expenditures and make adjustments.
Nope.
The next item is comments from citizens present.
Seeing none.
None. So we have budget review by Terry Olson.
So the Urban Renewal Agency has 3 budget funds. If you turn to page 6 and 7, budget, make sure people are following. This is the tax increment fund. The tax increment fund receives revenue from tax receipts of the current year. It receives revenue from tax receipts from prior years, and it receives revenue from the interest that's of money that's in that account. In expenditures, the only thing that money can be spent for, as I alluded to earlier, is debt service. When we sell bonds or take out loans, this money is used to pay off that debt. The other thing that needs to be in that fund is 10% of whatever bonds that we currently have outstanding needs to be left in that fund for a reserve. So that's the tax increment fund. If you have any questions at all relating to that fund, I know that Ron Tierney or Debbie Maloney will be glad to come up here and answer them. If you turn to page...
I do have a quick question over here.
Sure.
Just under resources, the very first line, under budget proposal, $550,000.
Okay, say that again, Darrell?
So under resources, the very first line, under the column of budget proposed, $550,032.
Okay.
So that's the 20% that we're talking about, right?
Page 6.
That is estimated taxes that are coming in for next year.
Right, and that's at a 20% level.
That's the 20%.
Okay.
Why don't you let me refer you to the page prior to this, page 5.
Okay.
It has the tax calculation.
Okay.
Do you see the $550,000 at the very bottom?
Right.
Okay.
So I guess...
Everything up above is how we got to that number.
Okay. But I guess the question I have is, then, does the remaining 80% go back to Lincoln City, to the general fund, or where does that go?
The general fund gets a portion of that 80%.
Okay.
So does the hospital district, the school district, the fire district,
Okay.
Lincoln County General.
Gotcha.
All the taxing districts that are on your property tax statement
Okay.
share in that 80%.
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
And you can see that prior years was in the $2 million.
Right.
So you're right. So if you turn to the page 8, then, this is the Property Rehabilitation Fund. And in this fund, the revenue from this fund comes from an allocation that we make out of our general fund. We determine how much money we want to fund the rehabilitation loan programs with. It also, the revenue is people that are paying back their loans, and then any interest that generates in that fund. The expenditures, We spend a little bit of money to do design services as an option when people take out a loan. We do have the rehabilitation loans, and then we have our economic development program in this fund. We don't anticipate spending the amounts that you see as totals in the expenditures. Whatever we don't spend is just carried over the next year but it is available if some wonderful projects came along this year. But we do have loans, and they're both in the property rehabilitation line item and also in the economic development loan programs. So if we jump back now to page this is the Urban Renewal Agency's general fund. And the general fund, the money in the general fund, the revenue portion of that general fund comes from bond sales or loan proceeds. It also comes from any interest that's generated, and then if we get a grant from some other agency, that money goes into the revenue side of the general fund. In the expenditure side, this covers administrative costs, materials and services, and the capital construction of our projects and such. So we're on page 1. It begins after resources. We have personal services. And if you have any questions regarding personal services, our finance director, Debbie Mamoni, will be happy to answer any of those. In materials and services, these budget numbers in this section tend to be smaller amounts, except for the reimbursements that you'll see for the city's general fund and the Lincoln Square Fund that are for support services to the agency. And I won't go through each line item unless there are any questions in materials and services.
Madam Chair, on page 2, third line down, engineering.
Yes.
Last year, we budgeted $60,000. In the previous years, we'd not done anything, and apparently we didn't actually spend any of that $60,000. And I'm just wondering, why are we budgeting $60,000 from the previous year and not spending it?
I think there was some confusion as to what that line item was to be used for last year. And if anybody wants to step up and help with that one. And so, but we didn't use it, and we have other places in the budget where we use engineering. If it's engineering for a specific project, then we want it in that project. We don't want to hide it or put it in another project. We want to be able to track the total cost of that project. So if we're doing a street improvement project, we want the engineering to be in there. And I think last year there was either a possible project that was going to come up that was sort of unrelated, or it had to do with the amount of time and effort Public Works engineering was assisting us, something like that. But we ended up not using it, and so we didn't allocate any funding for it this year.
Okay, thank you.
Along that line, if I may, so does that mean? And I was trying to understand the whole layout here. On the third column, let's take page 2, for example, the budget for 2013-14 was, let's take the first legal service was $5,000. The estimate, the next column over, I think that's what you're projecting that will be the actual at the end of the year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's doubled. The legal services have doubled. Is there a reason for that? I mean, don't we have an on-staff attorney? And if so, why would that double or almost double?
Yeah, the major thing there will be something called a substantial amendment. We're going to do another substantial amendment this year to piggyback onto the extension of the Urban Renewal Agency. We're going to expand the district a little bit larger, and that takes a substantial amendment. And we're doing that in order to bring in some properties so that we can do projects that are within the district now. But they're outside the district now, we need to do that project, so we're going to bring that area into the district. There are some businesses or some development areas that we'd like to encourage to be developed that weren't blighted in 1988, but look to be blighted now or are blighted because they're vacant. And so most of that additional funding will go towards the legal expenses of the substantial amendment, which are a very specialized legal field.
All right, and along that same note with the 60,000 that was budgeted for engineering, if that wasn't used, does that show up somewhere as still being a surplus or being an ending balance, or?
Yeah, so that was, what you're looking at is correct. That was last year's budget.
Right.
And we've estimated at the end of this year, we will have spent nothing in that line item.
Okay.
Whatever isn't spent from that last year's budget shows up in the beginning fund balance, which I think we call it on page 4, the unappropriated fund balance. I believe that's what didn't get spent this year.
Okay.
We anticipate won't get spent.
Okay, one other thing, if I may, and I don't need the budget approved column, I would like to see that being percentage change from last year, or add another column, because the budget approved column doesn't do anything at this point. It looks like a spreadsheet, kind of a column that's used later on to check a box or something. But I don't know about the rest of the council members and budget committee members, but I'd like to see a percentage change from last year to this on all of these.
Good idea.
So noted. It may be something that we can at least do in the budget message or, in some other way, but we will note that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to, however, direct your attention to the bottom of page 2. Probably the most significant line item in the materials and services is called ADA planning and compliance. This amount is allocated for consulting services and the development of the city's Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan. The agency is a contributing partner with the city in this effort. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a plan to identify discrepancies that we have in city facilities and city right-of-way. It's a very comprehensive study, and coming up with a plan to address those over the course of several years. And so we have a consultant working on that. It's a public works effort that's spearheading it, but we're contributing to the cost of that. So that's one of the larger budget items, so I wanted to specifically address that and let you know what's going on with there. We'll talk a little bit more about ADA in the rest of the budget, but that one has to do with the compliance and planning of upgrading and modifying things that are already built. Okay?
Mr. Olson, before we leave page 2,
Yes.
a little more than halfway down the sheet, starting with systems maintenance buildings,
Yes.
we've got a number of items listed at $2,500, all systems maintenance.
Yes. There are things that, years ago, again, if we were doing something in the Ocean Lake area that wasn't actually a project, but maybe it was preparation for a project or a big meeting or a charrette, those sorts of things. They weren't actually capital improvements, and so, but we would put them in the capital construction fund, and so we've been asked to take those out. So if it isn't something that can be capitalized and depreciated, and it isn't a project, then they don't want that money to be in the capital fund. And so these are minimal amounts for meetings and stuff. And as you can see, we don't normally get close to those numbers. Sometimes we do. It's hard to tell exactly what's going to crop up in a district, but that gives us some money to work with that doesn't show up in a depreciated item.
Thank you.
Can I go back to the ADA compliance?
You bet.
You said $25,000 in the urban renewal budget, and then in the main budget, the ADA improvements, it says the urban renewal budget is $20,000. So there's two different numbers. I don't know if that's for consulting and actual building, or is the $20,000 the same but different $25,000?
It may be a different $20,000. Yeah, I will. I'll go. We'll see it again in our capital construction budget, and that is $20,000.
So in addition to the consulting that we purchased through that side. Right.
Okay. There'll be $20,000 for actually doing stuff. Okay. So starting on page 3 is the capital outlay portion of the budget. And I'll highlight several of the budget lines, but but if you have any questions about any of them that I leave out, please feel free to ask. If you go down maybe 5, 6, 7 lines to sidewalk construction, that's the first major budget line in this in the capital outlay. There are 2 public works projects in this line item. There are the sidewalks along Highway 101 in front of Osborne Saw Shop and the Bonita Plaza in the South 19th Street area. They're working on a project there. And then there's the Highway 101 intersection at North 22nd. That's the Dairy Queen subway intersection. And they're going to be looking at replacing some sidewalks in there and doing some upgrades to the accessible ramps in that area. So those are 2 of the projects in there. Also, the Urban Renewal Agency has some money in there for the design of some sidewalks along the bay from Cutler City to Schooner Creek Bridge. And this will be part of the comprehensive Cutler District infrastructure plan, which you see in the budget message. There are some other projects in the Cutler infrastructure plan, and those are found in a line item just a couple down from that called S Bay Park and Bay Area Sidewalk. And the funding in this line item is to look at constructing parking lot along Highway 101 near the Bay House Restaurant. And then again, other projects within that Cutler infrastructure plan are found in Cutler City renovation projects. That's down a few more line items. And this funding will look at realigning Southwest Jetty Avenue intersection, and that is the street just past the Bay House before you get to the Crab Shop. There's that street that goes in at an angle. For years we've talked about realigning that street. It does 2 things. One, it slows traffic as it goes into Cutler City because it's just a deceleration lane, really. It also lines up our intersections so then that street could actually be a 2-way street. There's no reason why it can't be. It's wide enough to be a 2-way street, but it's 1-way because of the angle that it hits the highway. And the other thing is that the Bay House owns that gravel area, and they'd like to incorporate it into their parking lot. So it does all of those things. So that's one of the other projects that is in there. The other thing in the Cutler City renovation line item is a relocation of a public works water transmission line between Cutler City and the main and Taft. That line is now on the west side of the street. Occasionally it exposes itself due to erosion along the bank, and it makes everybody a little nervous. And so we've been looking at for years about relocating that line to the other side of the street. So one of the things in this infrastructure plan for the Cutler District is to look at least the design work and see what it would take to move that transmission line to the other side of the highway and away from the bank that continues to erode there.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
When I budget, I generally budget knowing expecting I'm going to spend X number of dollars, and that when I have the budget, that figure isn't larger than, or isn't smaller than the amount that I'm expecting to spend. And I'm confused by that Cutler City renovation projects, because you're seeing that we're going to spend $383,000, but we're only budgeting $150. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and so what you're seeing in the first line item where it says $383,000, that is an estimate of this year's budget, how much we think we're going to spend this year in this current budget, not the one we're talking about tonight. So how much do we think we were going to spend up until this new budget starts?
Okay.
And the 150 is what we think we're going to spend next year's budget.
Yeah, okay, I got you.
Okay? So, and that's not going to do a lot of projects, $150,000.
No.
It's mostly design work. So, so we'll be doing the design of some of these projects that I've been talking about, not the actual construction.
Okay.
Mr. Olson,
Yes.
Can I ask another question? I heard through the grapevine that sometimes the city completes projects that are not ADA compliant. So I'm hoping that all of these projects before or during their design phase, that you're going to incorporate whatever the ADA compliant requirements are. Is that a true statement?
We work really hard to do that, absolutely.
Hate to have to go back and retrofit,
We've stepped up our effort in that regard, for sure.
I see that the $10,000 for the Taft glass foundry, is that for the internal changes to accommodate a possible new tenant, or is that to the actual brick outside that's crumbling?
Yeah, that is for the possibility of making some changes to it in order to attract another
externally, or
not? Well, externally, and then we maybe open up a wall, put in a garage door or a new door, or maybe do some internal work that divides the difference into two sections. Yep. So if we move back, we spent a lot of time jumping around, sorry about that, because of this Cutler City infrastructure plan. But if we jump back up to Cultural Center, we have $50,000 allocated there. And this budget line item provides some funding that's needed, if it's needed, and approved, for various upgrades to the D-Lake School building, such as the work that's needed to address the south wall. Those of you may not be familiar, a portion of the south wall fell off the building, and what you see now is kind of a brick wall that's been tarred, and so we're looking at some options to address that. And the agency has chosen to, rather than actually do the work, some of those upgrades at the D-Lake School, is to provide grants and let them do the upgrades. So we've allocated some funding in there for the possibility of the Lincoln City Cultural Center to come forth and request grants in order to do upgrades to the building as needed.
Were we able to have a consultant check the other walls to make sure that wouldn't happen to the other ones?
Yeah, we had an engineer inspect the walls that were there. It looked like the facade that was put on them was done to keep the moisture from going into the brick, but over the years, what was holding it up deteriorated and it fell down. If we go now to the Nelscott renovation projects budget line. Nelscott renovation projects. This budget line is primarily for the 35th Street parking lot. As many of you know, we awarded a contract for the construction of a parking lot at the south end of the Nelscott Strip near the Christmas Cottage. We're sending out the contract this week for that. They hope to start in the middle of May, but some of the work will be done in our current budget, but most of the work will be in next year's budget, and so that's what that line item is for. D-Lake projects, you may have noticed that number, $1.85 million. It's a rather large number. It is for the undergrounding of the overhead lines in front of the D River, and so that's why it's so high. We believe that work will be able to be all completed in this coming budget year, and so that's what we anticipate the cost of that project will be. FYI for agency members, at the next meeting, we hope to have a presentation to update you on that project as to what those costs are, how they're broken out, some of the issues that have cropped up, and make sure that you're up to date on the projects now that we have a design concept.
Was Mr. Olson, was that a need or a want?
That was a want, I would.
So that structurally and capability-wise, the current lines are all working. Is it cosmetic? Is it?
Yeah, that's what all of our undergrounding projects have been livability sort of issues. That's one of the projects that's identified in the plan, is that the Urban Renewal Agency can underground power lines on portions of the highway, not all of Highway 101, but it identifies portions that can be undergrounded, and on 51st Street. And so this is one of the portions that can be, and it was brought forth by the agency to look at the undergrounding of that section, and so that's where this project came from. Okay. If we go to crosswalk construction. Crosswalk construction will be used to fund a crosswalk safety project yet to be determined. Public Works is looking at some existing mid-block crosswalks and the possibility of adding a new mid-block crosswalk, and so we are providing some funding in order to fund some sort of a project, sort of like maybe something similar that was done up by Sambo's Restaurant and the U.S. Mart, where we put in the crosswalk, we put in the island, we put in reflectors, and then we put in the rapid flashing beacons and everything that you can come up with in order to make those crossings at mid-block that aren't anticipated as safe as possible. So we continue to fund those types of projects that Public Works is spearheading. Under that, the next three budget lines, Wedler Pump Station, that is West Devils Lake Road. West Devils Lake Road Pump Station, Mr. Hawker referred to that. That upgrade is going to cost about $1 million. We think that we have a design already. The design is 3 or 4 years old. It needs to be updated. But once it's updated, then we believe that we can move forward on the construction of that project. Under that is the Wedler Force Main, West Devils Lake Road, Force Main, and that is to replace the Force Main. That is some sanitary sewer. Whenever possible, you want it to run downhill, and it does by itself. But there's occasions where needs to run uphill, and so those are force mains. Those are pumped uphill to where then it can start to gravity. We have a lot of those in town. There's over 30, I believe. And so we need to upgrade that line, make it larger. So we're going to increase the capacity of that plant to pump it, and so we need to increase the capacity of the line that it pumps it through. So that's in there. You can see that that's only $50,000. That certainly won't replace the line, but it will do the engineering and design to come up with a design for that project. It isn't as critical as the upgrading the pump station because it's not like 1,000 homes are going to be built the next day and need the line. We just need to upgrade the pump station so the capacity is there, and then we need to look at getting that force main in place by the time that it's needed.
Mr. Olson, if I may, is that the pump station that's going to allow the development? I'm not familiar with the West Devils Lake Road. Is that where it comes out on 101 at the north end of town? And is that where the new Cascade Head, and is that the development we're talking about this will service?
Exactly.
Thank you.
The Villages at Cascade Head property, the Lincoln Palisades that's up there, and then there is some other property there owned by some other people, and there's some property that isn't actually even in the city limits there, but it is in the urban road boundary that will come on. That pump station, yes, it is right there at the intersection of 101 and Bulls Lake Road.
Thank you.
And the last one below that one, the Rhodes End South Pump Station, it looks like actually one of those pump stations in Rhodes End is going to be needed to be upgraded first, and it's either the upgrading of this one that says here, or the upgrading or the design of the one at Salasee on Salasee Drive. We need a new pump station on Salasee Drive in Rhodes End area, and then we need to upgrade one of the ones there. And so one of the things, the money in this line item, which isn't very much, $10,000, is just the initial concept of what needs to be done there, so that then we know how to go about engineering that. And again, that's a public works project.
Madam Chair. Yes. Mr. Olson, yes. I'm just curious. I understand that I don't have a problem with the $10,000 for studying, but so are those projects anticipated within, say, the next 3 years or the next 5 years? Do you have any ballpark figure on that? On the specifically on the Rhodes End pump stations?
Yeah, I have a guess, but I will listen to see if I can hear the answer from the back of the room. Not hearing the answer from the back of the room.
He's in the front of the room, but I mean, I'm just trying to figure.
I think it'll be 5 years and out.
Okay. I mean, I wasn't arguing that we need to study it or that we need to do it. I was just trying to get a feel for how many years out. I mean, we were talking about the West Devils Lake one, which needs to be done now. You're talking about the force main, which is probably going to be within the next, I'd say, 3 to 5 years.
Yes.
And so then we're talking about 2 more projects that are down the road. Are they 3, 5, 8?
I think they're past 5 years.
Okay. That's all I was curious about. Just trying to get a sense.
The sooner we get at least a concept, the sooner we can do some reasonable planning.
Sure. Thank you.
And one of that concept and planning component is just what area that will serve, and then we will know when that area will be coming online.
Right.
Whether it's just serving the village's property or it services the Lincoln Palisades, or there are some other areas that are plan review right now for plan unit developments that are up there that are actually not in the city limits that have to be annexed. So I'm finishing up here. Finally, we have the ADA improvements budget line that we were talking about. There it's like 3 from the bottom, and there's $20,000 allocated in there for projects that upgrade or modify existing things in the city. So it's either a project that was built when the rules were different, and now that the rules have changed, their upgrades have to be made, or there are things that we just missed when the things were built years ago, or we had some of the things that have been built around town have been done by contractors working for the developer who put in sidewalks, and for whatever reason, those sidewalks didn't meet ADA requirements now, so we're going back and looking at doing some modifications. So we've allocated $20,000 to use for items that are identified in the transition plan. Those would be items that are within the urban renewal district, not just all over the city. The last line item of the budget is called annual capital reserve. You can think of this as the carryover funding for future years. We've allocated it in this year's budget so that it could be spent for something if it needs to be spent, but we don't anticipate it being spent, so it's just a carryover item. So we're really excited in the Urban Renewal Office to be able to continue doing the great work that the Urban Renewal Agency is doing. And anyone who's interested in knowing what the Urban Renewal Agency has been doing the last 25 years, we have a publication that shows the 125 projects that we've done. You can get it online, or if you stop by our office, we'd be glad to give you a copy. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
And Mr. Olson, on page 5, the last line before the estimated taxes to be collected, less amount not to be collected, 8%.
I think I know the answer to that, but Mr.
Taxes in the year in which we levy them historically have been 92%. So there's 8% that's not collected. The big item is the 3% discount if you pay your taxes in November. So, but that historically is what has not been collected in the year of levy. We get that back in prior taxes in that other line item in the future.
And in the next year, do we generally collect that 8%, or do we lose 2%?
Not in the very next year, but over a period of 5 years, we do. Then the reason being is those people are paying penalties and interest because they were delinquent. So that, in the long run, ends up making up for the 3% discount for that people do. But it's in the long run.
Yes, yes. And, Mr. Tierney, how does the permanent tax rate differ from the estimated composite tax rate?
Good question.
Can we help you with that one?
Okay. I've got to be able to say this right. The beginning point is the permanent tax rate, which is the permanent tax rate of all the overlapping districts, not just the city, but all the overlapping districts,
Taxing districts.
that are on your personal property tax statement. The majority in Lincoln City, the rate is $16.20. But you don't use bonds. To get to the composite tax rate, you don't use the bond portion of the $16.20. Like the school district bond, Lincoln City sewer bond, those have to be reduced out of the $16.20. And then if they have a local option levy, that is reduced. You get down the $14 that I'm estimating is an estimate, but it was $14.10 last year. So that's in the urban renewal portion. You are estimating what the composite tax rate is going to be. You're also estimating what the taxable value is going to be. You end up with a bunch of unknowns, and to get close is difficult. But we do get relatively close, but it's it's not like 1 is 1 plus 1.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, is that correct?
And that's why we won't let him retire.
Madam Chair? Kurt, regarding the write-up and then tying it back to the budget, and it was helpful having the projects there, a suggestion might be to highlight in some way those that have been approved by the agency and are kind of ongoing, and we're just looking for a new budget to be approved to finish the project or whatever. And then the ones that are kind of yet to be approved, haven't come before the agency, so identified, because I thought I had seen some of these before, and a man my age forgets whether they're approved or not. And it might just help. So for committee members, not all these projects here have gone through the agency. You know, they're being recommended, or at least budgeted, and then the agency would see them at some point for approval and action. So it would be fair to say then the budgeted item is just simply a placeholder in the event that, and if it isn't used much like the others, it drops to the ending balance.
Yep.
So and I only say that because I think years past there's been some confusion of as capital projects come before the budget committee, there's it may be implied, not intentionally, that these are all approved and moving ahead regardless.
I have another question. The planning for the pump station in Roads End or the forced main is $50,000 or that, and those are 3 to 5 years. In 3 to 5 years, when that's going to be planning and they have to be updated, like the $1 million West Devils Lake, I believe, that has to be updated as well. Is it a large amount of money to update the plans to put it in, or is the $50,000 for the forced main plans going to cost another $30,000 3 years from now when we're actually thinking about putting it in?
Yeah, when so there's projects in there where we're looking at just some conceptual planning, and that might be that $10,000 figure, for example. When that actual design is done, that may be a $70,000 engineering design when it gets designed. But the construction of it is likely to be the South Sea one. I don't think that's going to be a major pump station. That may be a $500,000 project. I think that the force main, as I remember it, the force main from Wedler to Wacoma Beach Pump Station, which is by surf tides, so a line has to be put all the way there. It's somewhere in the $500,000 to $800,000 range. That's the estimates that we have so far. So, yeah, and so those numbers would come up in future budgets when it looks like that's going to get done. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to comment. I liked your comment, Dick. I had the same frustrations, if you will. You know, what projects have been completed in this year's budget, or what percentage completion are they, and you know, how much more money are we going to spend on them? I felt the same, you know, confusion about where we stand on these individual items.
I'm not sure that, can you hear me with the microphone now? Okay. Are there any other budget committee members who have questions or comments? We're ready now to our other meeting a little bit.
Madam Chair, I would move that the Budget Committee send or approve this budget and send it on to the Council
Urban Renewal.
for review.
I would second that.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve this budget as presented. City Clerk, will you vote?
Dick Anderson,
Yes.
Gordon Eggleton,
Yes.
Gary Ellingson,
Yes.
Dennis Hoagland,
Yes.
Michael Holt,
Yes.
Chester Norikis,
Yes.
Henry Quant,
Yes.
Wes Ryan,
Yes.
Roger Sprague,
Yes.
James Taylor,
Yes.
Susan Walke,
Yes.
and Jeff Wiseman. Motion carries.